Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're back in the Goblin Caves doing some Rat Cleric to make a little money. If this is your first time joining us, I'd like to welcome you to the channel, where we talk about all things dark and darker. If you enjoyed yourself, please like and subscribe. It helps me a ton. But regardless, today's topic of conversation is, what class should I main in Dark and Darker? I've gotten this question a few times. And I want to kind of expand on my thoughts about what classes are good in the meta currently, which classes are particularly newbie friendly, which ones are going to make you a lot of money, but most importantly, what synergizes in 2-man and 3-man group compositions today. So before we get started, let's just go ahead and acknowledge that you should play whatever you have the most fun with, right? This is a game after all. And if you enjoy playing a class which is considered by the community to be particularly weak, that's okay if you're having a good time. But if you are an efficiency enthusiast like myself, you want to be contributing maximum value to you and your team, and that means playing something that's incredibly effective. And with a game as complex as this one, with as many classes and as many permutations and just overall complexity as this game has, that is going to be a highly debated topic. But let's start off with the obvious. I recommend Cleric. I think they are the strongest class right now for a couple different reasons. They are incredibly new player friendly. They have a great deal of sustain. They have a great deal of versatility with regard to their builds, their roles inside of team comps, and their spell arsenal and perks really allow them to perform pretty much every role in the game. They can support a team better than any other class. Their buffs, their heals, all of these things are S tier. They can play the frontline tank role very well. They're incredibly beefy when built that way. You can stack PDR and all stats on them, and they become frontline juggernauts that are very difficult to deal with. They can create a lot of space around them, and so they can frontline for pretty much any group. Lastly, they have very valid and effective DPS builds, whether that's a melee DPS build or a spell DPS build, an area denial DPS build. They're excellent selection of spells, their gearing options. They're just one. They are the strongest class in Dark and Darker right now. They have access to the most powerful perk in the game, which is Perseverance, which is a 3-point damage ablative. All damage sources are reduced by 3, and this, it's really strong. The second class that I would recommend is Ranger, and that's what I main generally in group comps. The class is the most effective DPS class. They have a lot of versatility inside the role of DPS. They can be effective both in melee, less so, but their ranged build is top tier. I thought that might change with the recent balance reworks that Iron Mace has undergone, but they're showing no signs that they're going to remove Ranger from that top tier anytime soon. The re-addition of weapon damage on gear means that a really well built and assembled Ranger kit is going to be capable of 2-tapping even the thickest of targets with some ease. I don't think this is a particularly new player friendly class. It is a requirement to play Ranger to understand positioning both in PvE and PvP, and this is a a learned skill, a practice skill that only comes with experience and time. I do recommend you take a look at it, but you may be, asking yourself, why do people think this class is so good when I miss a couple shots and I lose every PvP engagement? As you saw earlier in this clip, I closed ground on a ranger. He missed, I believe, 4 out of 5 of his shots. Had he hit 4 out of 5 of those shots, he probably would have beat me in that fight. So, there is a little bit of a learning curve with Ranger, but I think it's the second most versatile, strongest class currently in Dark and Darker, and I think that it is top tier, S tier DPS now and for the foreseeable future. Getting on to the third, I think that this is going to be a toss-up between, solo play point of view, duo, and trio. So the Bard is another support class. I think it is very strong right now. It brings a great deal of versatility to almost any comp. It can be inserted in any 3-man stack and provide a lot of value with its wide assortment of team buffs, movement speed, acceleration, utility in the form of opening locked chests, just incredibly strong. It has been in the past extremely challenging to play when the Bard 10 skill variant was, mandatory. There was a lot of plates that had to be spun all the time, but that's been simplified now that knowledge is the primary control over how many spells you can take for them. They're down to a reasonable number of buffs that they need to run at any given time. Their debuffs on enemy players in PvP is fantastic. It's good in PvE as well. They're really strong. From a DPS point of view, I think the third best character right now is going to be Wizard. Iron Mace has gone back and forth trying to balance Wizard. I think that they have largely failed in that endeavor. Wizard, more so than any class that I've seen in this game, scales tremendously with gear. And so, your experience as a low-geared wizard is fundamentally different than a well-geared wizard. And that's true of every class, but it feels so different when you're playing wizard. If you don't know, knowledge impacts so much on the wizard class, and when you start reaching a couple breakpoints in knowledge, the casting speed and damage, they kind of feed on themselves and become more than the sum of their parts. And I think Wizard's in a really, really strong spot right now. Moving on down the line, I think both Barbarian and Fighter are doing okay. They have certainly fallen from their place just a month and a half ago with the changes to PDR, physical damage reduction. But that being the case, I think that with the gear changes that Iron Mace has implemented this week, I think we're going to be able to see some really top-tier warrior builds. Fighter. So when we're talking about Fighter, this is also like the first or second class that I recommend to new players when they're coming into Dark and Darker to kind of learn the game. Fighter has a good deal of sustain when run correctly with Second Wind and Sprint. And Sprint in particular is a great skill because the first thing you need to learn in Dark and Darker is positioning and how to not take any damage from PvE encounters. Like how to fight mobs, how to bait out attacks, how to space correctly so that you are able to clear AI content without taking, significant amounts of damage. Second Wind will help you, give you a little bit of a cushion there. also in a PvP context, the second wind allows you to just win a lot of fights that you would otherwise lose as a fighter. Fighter also scales very well with gear. It has a myriad of build options, effective builds from, a two-handed weapon build to a strength and agility build in the form of the Slayer, or as Tossfather has coined the term, the half Slayer build, where you're still in plate but you're running dual wield weapon styles. They have Weapons Master, which is the no-brainer go-to pick for the low-level fighter, allowing you to pick up and use any weapon that you come across and giving you a much broader selection of ranged weapons. Ranged weapons are simply going to allow you to, break groups of mobs, pulling them one at a time, and allowing you to kind of fight them in relative comfort compared to the anxiety of having to break into, a room with multiple melees ranged and caster minions that you have to dispose of. Barbarian is effective. It requires a little bit more support. It requires much better spacing and spatial awareness. As you're seeing right here, I'm fighting this Barbarian. He is using the Battle Axe. It is a terrible weapon even after the changes. And spacing is what this fight's all about. Additionally, I had the Protection Shrine giving me an additional 15% PDR, so I just kind of straight up stat checked him and won. Regardless, I think Barbarian works really well in kind of a buff ball comp. In 3-man, it's pretty effective with either Cleric, Bard, or Wizard in a support role around the Barbarian, and providing that he is able to close, he'll do a tremendous amount of damage in PvP. So, lastly and in closing, I see that there's a ton of players playing Warlock right now, and from what I understand, it's a lot of fun to play. It can be effective in a 3-man comp, but frankly, we're at a spot right now where it is, the meta's fairly open for any kind of 3-man comp to be quasi-viable. I think that Warlock's best build is still their 0 spell, Phantomize, and Blow of Corruption build using a heavy two-hander, preferably longsword, which turns them into kind of a bargain basement barbarian in a certain sense. That's certainly effective. I think it's really difficult for Warlock to get a fair shake right now with Rangers being so strong, because Rangers tend to just end soft targets in group PvP. So more on that to come. I know there's a lot of hype about it. I know a lot of their spells are fun, but that's my hot take. I don't think Warlock's particularly strong. I would encourage players to stay away from it. And sadly, right now, Rogue is also, I think, incredibly weak in the team sense. I think Iron Mace has shown a desire to bring back kind of the stealth landmine approach. So with enough gear plus weapon damage, a Rogue stealth behind a door, when you open it up, they open with ambush, weak point, rupture, and you're dead really before you can do anything. I think that is going to be coming back, but once again, that's kind of a solo play style. It's difficult to execute in a team environment, and I think that while rogues are going to be a niche pick, I don't really see them vying for a spot in most 3-man comps. Regardless, that's been my quick breakdown of where I think we are with regard to classes. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. It helps me a ton, and good luck to you in your raids to come.